This podcast contains strong language. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, and welcome back to We're Not Over 6 Feet Under, the podcast where we talk about the aughts' most morose TV show about a Gen Xer and a funeral home and mortality, episode by episode, spoiler-free. I'm your host, Jenna Shearer. I'm a writer, editor, and pop culture critic.
And I'm your other host, Caroline McGraw. I'm a playwright and screenwriter. This week, we're talking about Season 3, Episode 12, Twilight, which originally aired on May 18th, 2003. This episode was written by Craig Wright and directed by Kathy Bates.
Kathy!
When I realized that Craig Wright wrote this episode, I was like, oh, it makes total sense because so many of these scenes feel like scenes from a play. In a good way. It's a compliment in a good way.
Also very poetic, this episode.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't like watching it, so...
I did like watching it.
Okay, I did not find the experience of watching this episode pleasant in any way, but that does not mean it was not full of virtues, but it was unpleasant.
Anytime you could use the phrase tone poem to describe an episode of television, I'm like, feed it to me, microwave it, get it ready. Don't microwave it, like put it in the oven, Like have some self-respect.
I was excited to start this episode because the first person we see is Jim Beaver from Deadwood.
And I was excited to see Ann Dudek from The Magicians and Mad Men.
Oh, yes. And I was excited to see her as well. I've never seen The Magicians, but she's so wonderful on Mad Men. And I feel like she pops up on a lot of things and should stay working because she's really good. Mm-hmm. So Jim Beaver is telling Ann Dudek and some other people how to deal with attending an execution.
A lot of people at this execution.
Yeah. I wanted to know what the relationship was, who else was there, because, obviously we learn about Anne, who is playing a character named Allison. We learn about her deal later. But everybody else, I was like, are there parents of the victims? Who is it? Other family members who's there?
Presumably victims' families and maybe press. I don't know. Does press go to executions?
I mean, what I don't know about attending an execution could really fill a warehouse, as they say. We get a little bit of a laundry list of what might happen to the body of the condemned. There could be a death rattle, a snort, bleeding from the nose, all of this post-mortem. No, thank you. No, thank you.
Capital punishment is bad. I'm on Arthur's side here.
I am too. I can't wait to talk about that because I very much am on Arthur's side. But
I'm shocked that neither of us are on Rico's side, as we generally always are.
Yeah, me and Rico's political opinions line right up. This is a 2-scene death scene, which we don't always get on 6 Feet Under, because next we're with a very beefy man in prison garb. And he's strapped down to a terrible table.
Yeah, a table that and this must be accurate to what happens, but the table basically puts him in a crucifix pose.
I mean, this is the beginning of me finding this episode compelling but deeply unpleasant. He's ranting about how there's no excuse for what's happening to him. What does the state of Texas think they're teaching anybody with this?
He says you're all going to cry in the same wet hell that I'm going to.
Wet hell is, that's kind of where Nate is. But, I mean, the ocean is very hellish in this episode.
Oh, yeah.
I think this might be the most disturbing scene I've seen on 6 Feet Under so far.
It's so well done, and it's so disturbing. This actor, in his very short time, is incredible. He's terrifying, and he's also on point. This man, we will later learn is a serial killer. Specifically kills women, as many serial killers do. But yeah, it's really disturbing, and they don't shy away from showing how unpleasant it is to die from lethal injection, which has been widely shown to be a horrible practice.
Yeah. R.I.P. I mean, P is very questionable, but R.I.P. Carl Desmond Williman, 1948 to 2003.
R.I.W.H. Rest in wet hell.
Oh, no. That's going to haunt me. I don't care for that, but it is accurate.
We laugh because it's horrific.
Yeah, we laugh because it's a true waking nightmare. So speaking of, Nate is sitting on his bed and he's listening to Brenda leave the last in what is clearly many, many messages. Mm-hmm. I miss this trope in television of somebody like listening to somebody leave a message. We don't get that anymore. Maya is in her playpen and Nate is surrounded by missing posters for Lisa. Yeah. And he just like takes that answering machine right out of the wall.
I obviously have a few Heaven Can't Nates, but I also, Nate is going through some really horrible shit. So don't blame him, but I blame him. Not for this.
No, not for this. Well, I was going to say, like, my Heaven Can't Nates. I feel like we haven't had that many lately, and they just really came roaring back this episode.
Again, Peter Krause, incredible actor. In the last episode, he was really playing the kind of, like, numb grief and shock. And in this episode, he's playing, like, the real, like, anger that comes after it and the frustration. Because Ruth tells us in a bit that it's been more than 2 weeks since Lisa disappeared.
So next we catch up with Claire. She's in bed as she's staring into space and her radio alarm turns on and tells us it's about to be 90 degrees.
I wrote poor Claire in my notes like 200 times, but this is the beginning of the poor Claires. In the next scene, speaking of people who are in a bind, David is on the phone at home and he's like trying to be overly polite to a telemarketer, which is just, vintage David. And then Keith comes up and grabs the phone and says, "We're not interested," and hangs up. And this turns into a whole thing that is clearly not just about a telemarketer.
Keith is so frustrating in this episode, and he really is in the background, so we don't actually spend that much time with him. But, he really is. It's a little tough to deal with him. He tells David not to be so goddamn nice, that it's like nails on a chalkboard to him. And they get into it pretty quickly that, this is obviously about what happened in San Diego / their entire relationship. Mm-hmm. Keith says, basically, like, get it through your head that you're the one who fucked up in San Diego. He's, like, a little right.
But David's more right.
Yeah.
And just as a reminder for listeners, what happened was that David kind of got in between Keith and his father when they were yelling at each other and tried to stand up for Keith, and that made Keith really angry because he said it wasn't his place. But I think I come down on David's side here. But I think it's also they're missing each other. They're not understanding each other because David is saying, "You never want me to be on your side. I always want to be on your side, and you never want to be on my side." Keith is really closed off, so it's hard to tell what's going on with him except for anger, but, they have different definitions of what it means to be on someone's side.
Well, it just broke my heart when David says, "You don't really like me, you're not for me."
Oh, God.
This fight just feels so real.
It does. David, as a character, always, like, it takes a lot for him to start yelling. And the fact that he just gets right into yelling at the beginning of this episode, like, shows you how, like, far at the end of his rope he is with Keith right now.
Well, and also, he says the word abuse during this fight. Like, he calls, how Keith treats him abuse. And we can discuss it, but, like, that there is a really abusive aspect to the way Keith treats David.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the thing that David says to him at the end is he's always afraid that Keith is going to hit him. Yeah. Which, Matthew St. Patrick really sells that. His response is just like, no, like, just complete, like, I think that's really his wake up where he's like, I would never hit you. And the fact that you think that I would, I mean, again, this is all kind of me kind of guessing from how he's playing the role, but I think it's a real heartbreaking moment.
I think Matthew St. Patrick has always been good on the show, but this season I do think that he's really shown.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, season 2 was obviously, it was kind of hard to watch, his dynamic with David because he was just always just angry at him. And then he's gone on a real journey this season, through therapy at the beginning, and they did have their good times, and now they're kind of back where they were, which I don't know, it just feels very true to life. We've talked about before how remarkable for television Keith and David's relationship is for many reasons, but partially because we do see this couple like going through cycles, like, and repeating, which happens in real life.
So next we're with Claire, and she's at Planned Parenthood, and she's doing a pre-abortion appointment to go over what's going to happen. And the nurse, is like, can a family member or a friend give you a ride home? And this poor nurse does not know. Fishers don't have friends.
No, God. It especially broke my heart for Claire to not have friends, because she's young. She's in college. And, I was thinking about it, and I'm like, her only friend really was Russell.
Yeah. Zachary Quinto is somewhere like, girl, should have talked to me. I would have given you a ride.
So next, Nate and Rico are doing intake with Allison, who is the daughter of Carl, who was executed. And she's, she does an incredible job in this episode. She is portraying this very kind of complicated, deeply hidden grief. Because, what do you do when your father is a just awful, awful man? But she's talking about how she lost her job because she took time off from work to go to the execution. And
I believe it's Rico who brings up, says, I don't know if you want to have a service. And she's like, yeah, I do. I guess she told David, I told you I wanted a service. But I was really worried about Rico's, because, if you are anything less than what Rico considers to be a moral, upstanding person. I think we all remember, how he was when the guy who, had the going postal workplace shooting, who was not killed a lot of people, but was not a serial killer in the way this guy seems to have been. Or if you're, a gay person.
I was surprised that Rico, at least in this front-facing mode, he does hold it together. He doesn't let his contempt and judgment show. He's learning a little bit, I guess.
I guess so. Or he's distracted by his whatever's going on with him at home and just doesn't have the energy to, judge everybody. Although he does do some judgment later. So what am I talking about? Allison says, I told Father Jack that I wanted to have the service. So Father Jack is back in the robes.
I was confused because when we saw Father Jack, when they ran into him when they were getting porn DVDs, I thought he said not Father anymore, just Jack.
But he apparently is back at St. Bart's?
Yeah, I don't understand, because he's very yeah, David, it's cool that you're gay. It can be good to have a relationship with a man, and I'm just like, what's happening?
I guess we can talk about that when we get to that scene, but I have some Father Jack questions. But anyway, Rico goes to kind of check on what's going on with the service, leaving Nate and Allison alone.
Nate looks dead. His hair has completely flopped down over his face. He has a 15 o'clock shadow. But she very quickly is very obviously flirting with him, which is a lot for everybody.
Yeah, Nate shows her some caskets from the old casket catalog and notices, look, I'm sorry if you have this tattoo. This tattoo, and I think it's perfect, it's really well written, and whoever designed it, this tattoo sucks so bad.
I love how weird it is. It's so weird.
Yeah.
I was just
really weird.
Yes, this is so weird and so specific. Give it to us, Craig Wright. So she's wearing a very short skirt, and Nate, when he's sitting next to her showing her coffins, which she calls boxes, by the way, he sees the edges of this tattoo, and she of course slowly starts pulling up the hem of her skirt, and it's a tattoo of little tiny people going through pipes. And she has this whole explanation about how they get destroyed, but then they get created again. And
her explanation is nonsense. I don't know. Did she come up with it when she was high? Did she, think it was going to be something else and then it turned into this and she made up a weird explanation? I don't know. But it is gobbledygook, basically, what she's saying. Nate, I don't know. Nate's kind of into it. I don't know.
At this point, I wouddn't say Nate has the capacity to be into anything.
Yeah, I guess you're right. That's true.
This woman is putting the moves on him, and he's just I don't know. I'm an object right now.
I would say he also seems to be excited to be feeling something that is different than what he's been feeling for the past 2 weeks.
Yes.
When Rico comes back, like when we see how they're sitting from the angle, like Rico's point of view, it's too close.
Freddie Rodriguez's like little expression before he like snaps back to being kind of like a bland funeral director is just brilliant.
Yeah. All the Fishers are in the kitchen.
And Ruth is, of course, talking about cabbage rolls in Tupperware.
I do just also want to point out that Ruth is like, hey, I made all of my grown-up children dinner. Like my grown-up children who cannot feed themselves dinner. You know, they fully regressed.
Like, even before that, when Lisa was around, it was Lisa or Ruth cooking. Like,
yep.
I don't think the three of them... Well, not... David cooks at home. But I don't think that, like, Nate and Claire have, like, ever cooked anything in their lives. Ruth finds a Dr. Pepper in the fridge, and she says that it must be Lisa's, and Nate is like, she doesn't drink Dr. Pepper. And then we recall that in the car that they found abandoned by the beach, there was a Dr. Pepper can, and Nate also said she doesn't drink Dr. Pepper. So then he kind of goes into what will be the first of several, not fantasies, like waking nightmares about what could have possibly happened to Lisa. And it's very like this like blown out color. And he imagines her with this dude who is like 90% less hot than Peter Krause.
He like has like a goatee and he's like a bad boy. And I'm not laughing at Nate's very real pain in envisioning this, but it is very funny that he calls Nate toxic. Like and I was like, that's a very 2021 thing to say.
It's true.
Both Claire and Ruth are like, yeah, Lisa definitely drank Dr. Pepper, and it's like she was secretly this Dr. Pepper fiend and Nate never knew. It's just like an odd little detail.
Yeah, but Nate imagines this guy and Lisa, like, after she's like, I should have taken Maya, but I guess I'm just gonna go off with you, and they disappear in like a convertible with heavy metal music playing.
That's right. So Ruth is like out the door. She's got an overnight bag.
So it turns out she is going to spend the weekend at George's. James Cromwell, who we met in the last episode.
Claire asks Nate and David what they're doing tomorrow, and they both say they're busy. And
that's right.
I just want her to... I feel like David would take her. Maybe not Nate. Maybe Nate is not the guy to ask to do this right now.
No.
I feel like David would take her to her abortion.
I think he would, but I totally understand. I mean, I think even if all this stuff wasn't going on with Lisa, I think Claire would find it really hard to talk to her family about this. Like,
I guess that's right.
Yeah. But I also love how David and Nate say same old shit at the exact same time in the exact same way.
I do too.
So in the next scene, George and Ruth are in bed. And the first thing I will say is, again, 6 Feet Under, breaking barriers, showing like two like older people having a ton of sex and feeling great about it. And it's delightful.
And like Ruth is wearing just like an iconic nightgown. She's wearing that color, that sort of lilac color all through this episode, like periwinkle and lilac. And it's really great. And they're doing like trivia in bed.
Trivia is my love language, so I can understand that. But
fair enough.
But yeah, they have moved very fast. And I will say, like, in terms of also kind of performances, like showing character growth, Ruth, like, in this entire episode, like, since she has met George, has transformed. Like, she is acting like a confident adult woman for the first time in this entire series.
Absolutely. And she seems lighter, which is, she is the only person in this episode who ever seems, the only Fisher anyway in this episode who ever seems lighter.
Yeah.
She's really at ease. It's really wonderful.
She also, another, like, very, like, lovely, weird, poetic speech that there are many of in this episode, is she talks about how, like, everything that's been happening with Lisa is making her think about, like, not wanting to waste her life. And she says, I do feel like the stars are moving a little faster lately. And she's talking about how her life feels like it's moving in fast motion. And obviously, I have some worries about George, but it is nice to see Ruth in this place. It's really lovely.
We get in the next little, very short scene, and there's a lot of very short scenes in this episode. Claire's listening to music.
She is listening to one of my favorite depressing songs that I first heard on this show, which is Azure Ray's Rise.
Oh, it's very important that Claire and I had the same cell phone. That was my first cell phone.
Yes. What is it, Nokia?
It's a sky blue Nokia, and it had a
Nice.
little antenna. She doesn't pull the antenna out, but I know it's there. She gets a call on this very special cell phone from Russell, who he's been calling nonstop for the past few weeks.
Yeah, and she just hangs up on him.
So we're in the embalming room, and truly this episode taught us a lesson that we've already been taught many times, but it's so important to have friends, because if you don't have friends, then you have to confide your relationship problems to Rico.
I was shocked. So they're re-embalming the body of Carl because Rico has said that it was too orangey when it came to them. But yeah, David is like talking about his relationship troubles with like fucking homophobic Rico.
No, don't do it. And I will say that when Rico says, "Why do you stay together if it's always this bad?" I was like, yeah, that is a good question.
Oh, it's absolutely. I don't think, aside from what he says about capital punishment in a second, I don't think he's being actually that bad to David in this scene.
I don't love it when Rico says, "If you don't have kids, I don't know why anyone stays together." I don't love that.
To me, I mean, I hated that, but that to me felt less like he's saying something shitty to David and more that like, oh my God, like what is up with your marriage? Like that is the most depressing thing I have ever heard. Like the only reason to stay together is because kids force you together. I'm like, oh my God, Rico, get divorced immediately.
No, you're absolutely right. It's definitely telling on Rico more than it's saying anything to David. And David is kind of like, what? And Rico thinks it's a compliment.
Arthur walks in, and I'd forgotten he was even still there. I figured he just got, like, shunted out as soon as he and Ruth stopped seeing each other, quote
oh, no,
unquote.
that's so illegal.
But they start talking about capital punishment, and Arthur says he's against it, and Rico, of course, is for it. Classic Rico. This is the first time I've ever said this, but I do want to put a Rico soundbite in here, because he gets a savage line.
What about the value of human life?
He cashed in the value of his human life a long time ago. Okay, he is a freaking Dorito. Crunch him, they'll make more.
That was some writing.
That was some real writing. Like, obviously what he's saying is heinous, but I was also like, dark, glib, let's do it.
It's very Catholic.
Oh, very Catholic.
Obviously, Rico is pro-life.
Oh,
like there's no chance Rico ever thinks abortion is okay, but he's definitely like, let's fry up this dude.
Yeah. Shocking Claire did not ask him for a ride to the clinic.
So Nate comes into this fray. He's letting them know he's going for a run and that Claire is with Maya. And then when Nate goes upstairs to go on his run, Allison Williman is there.
Yup, she comes in with the most paltry excuse about like, I just wanted to check on the flowers. And she, like a cut flower, is thirsty.
Oh, she's really good in this episode. It's simultaneously like the way she plays her, you're like, I understand who this woman is. Mm-hmm. Of course she had, the one person who's shown her like a modicum of kindness she has latched onto. I mean, also Nate is handsome, but like, yes. I think that anybody who showed her any attention, and I mean, he's wearing his wedding ring. It's not like she thinks he's single.
No, she's into that he's married.
Yeah, it's upsetting. So, she invites him for coffee. She asks if his wife is around.
He doesn't say my wife is missing. He just says my wife isn't around. But he does refuse the offer of a date, which I'm sure means this is going to be the end of this and he will be a very good boy.
Yeah, we're never going to see her ever again. And then Claire is watching Maya and she can't look directly at Maya.
Well, she's also watching the clock to see what time her abortion is.
So I love this next scene.
Ruth and George are shopping for drills at a hardware store, and they, like, I never had on my 6 feet under bingo card, like, Ruth makes drills sexy.
Yeah, they're like debating corded versus cordless, like, if George gets a cordless, like, will he be able to keep its charge? And Ruth's going to help him keep that charge, she says later. And, she really puts her whole self into that. They're in this sort of teenagery relationship because the kind of like running errands. We had this with Claire and Russell.
That's right, at the art store with the paint.
A couple of any age can run an errand together, but it does feel like such a signifier of a younger relationship to be like, oh, now we're doing an adult thing and we're like shopping together and we're like, I'll help you pick something out. And it just is like really, I really wish we could just stay in this moment forever.
I know. Well, it's interesting because the flip side of it is they're very aware, you know, this is a very existential episode in a very existential show.
Yeah.
But, you know, George says, like, this is what life is, coming to places like this, and then you die. Ugh. And I'm like, yeah, you're sure right, George. But they say that they should get married.
Well, Ruth is the one who brings it up.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, totally. Like, he's into it.
Mm-hmm.
George says those 4 little words that every woman longs to hear. I've been married before.
He's been married 6 times.
It's too many times. And even when we get the explanation, George, it's still too many times. Like, it's too many times to be like, I should get married to this woman I've known 2.5 weeks.
I mean, honestly, it's on Ruth for being like, that's cool.
Yeah. Ruth is saying yes to life too much.
So in the next scene, Nate is running, which I don't think we've seen him do in a while, but is such an iconic Nate panic move.
He's running and he is once again, fantasizing is not quite the right word, dreaming, imagining where Lisa is and what happened to her. And this time she's on the beach near where her car was found. And a guy, it's Carl, right?
It's Carl, yeah.
He's giving Fantasy Lisa a sob story about having lost his dog, which is big Ted Bundy, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Help, I'm a helpless man who needs help, energy. And he's going to murder her in Nate's fantasy.
And then Nate comes back to find on his stoop the undisputed MVP of this episode, Brenda Chenoweth.
Brenda. I love you, Brenda.
This whole episode, she's just like this lovely, supportive, steady energy, which is something we are not used to Brenda being. Obviously and understandably, Nate isn't there for this. Yeah,
I get it. I mean, I'm glad. I think it's okay that she's there. She really does want to check on him. When Brenda later says she is not in love with Nate anymore, I believe that she believes that.
Yes, I think she's definitely in love with Nate.
Yes.
I think she subconsciously knows it. I don't know if she consciously knows it.
Well, yeah, and I don't think that she's trying to. I really think she is trying to help him and is not trying to insinuate herself. She really is worried about him.
Again, like, Nate is shitty to her, but Nate gets a huge pass for what he's going through. You know, he basically tells her, he's like, I haven't slept in days, like, I'm losing my mind, like, I can't deal with you, like, you kissed me. Which, of course, is different than what he had said that night, where he's like, we kissed each other. He seems to be like, you know, Lisa disappeared because we kissed. Yeah, it's absolutely his guilt. He's doing this magical thinking where he's like, this wouldn't have happened if I didn't kiss you when she was away. He basically pieces out, and as he's piecing out, Claire is walking out on the porch with Maya. He grabs Maya, and then it's Claire and Brenda alone on the porch, and I was like, oh my god, Claire, it's your ride! She says, can I have a ride? I have to get an abortion. And Brenda says, sure. We haven't had, like, Claire and Brenda time since, I think, like, season 1 or 2. Yeah, spending time with them together was so great. And I don't know, I can't remember if it's in the rest of the series, and it's not even important, but has Brenda had an abortion was a question. Yes. I'm glad we don't have that scene that could have, in a lesser show, easily could have been like Claire being like, has this ever happened to you? And Brenda being like, yeah. And then I didn't have anyone to give me a ride. Like, you know, we don't do that dumb thing. It's like all, you know, it's all in sort of the subtext, and it's really wonderful. So they're going to hop in the car. And David and Ruth are in the kitchen, and Ruth is talking about how he thinks like the Gay Men's Choir is probably really great for David. And we get another really lovely poetic moment where David says that he loves being in the midst of all these voices, and it's like he can kind of lose himself in this moment till he gets to the end of the song. He says it's a relief from the rest of life. Yeah. I think it's right after David says this that Ruth says, I think Lisa's dead. Mm-hmm. And David agrees. And this is a huge change from how we saw Ruth reacting to it in the last episode, where she was just in wild denial. Ruth tells David that she might like to marry George. She doesn't say
I'm engaged. I proposed in a Home Depot. And I get the impression that none of them have really spent any time with George.
No, when would they have had the chance to?
Well, and, yeah, I mean, it's not like he's hanging out and he's like, heard Lisa's missing, I'm going to chill out at the house. But something that I do like about George is that he does seem to have a life that was not just waiting for Ruth, which is a good thing. But yeah, anyway, David greets this with skepticism, which fair.
I appreciate that he greets it with skepticism instead of doing the usual thing that Ruth's children have often done, being like, Mom's being fucking crazy again.
Right. Yeah.
They have like a very mature conversation about it, and Ruth says something that I'm just like, oh, Ruth, where she says that when I'm with him, I feel like life is full of possibilities, and I haven't felt this in so long.
Yeah. Ugh. I love this scene between Claire and Brenda.
Oh God, me too.
It's so lovely. They're in Brenda's car and they're driving, and I guess Brenda must have asked Claire what food she likes.
I get the sense Brenda's just asking Claire, like, let's talk about things you like, and they're midway through having a conversation about their favorite kind of sushi.
Yeah, and Claire says she likes it, but not when it gets too Baroque.
So good. Again, a lot of short scenes. In the next scene, the gay men's chorus is singing Beautiful Dreamer, and David is singing, and he looks really wrecked. He
does. And after this rehearsal is over, Patrick asks David to hang out and to have lunch or a drink or something, and it's going to happen.
David is enthusiastic about it.
So Brenda is waiting with Claire at Planned Parenthood, and they just capture the experience of being at Planned Parenthood so incredibly well. Like, I remember being, 19 years old and at Planned Parenthood, and your name is called and you have to go wait somewhere else. Everybody at Planned Parenthood in this, in these scenes, they're very nice and they're very comforting, but it's like all business.
So I was curious about this because, I was watching this scene and I was like, this is like the whole experience of Claire's abortion. There's not the usual tortured TV thing where it's like, am I going to put him up for adoption? Like, do I feel guilty about this? Is like a doctor going to give me shit about this? Yeah. It's just this really straightforward portrayal of like, of course, Claire's getting an abortion. Everybody's going to be fine about it. And, it happens. And I was curious. I'm like, this must have been one of the first times on TV this ever happened. And in fact, it was one of the first times on TV this ever happened. Yeah. So I found this Vox article that I'll link to in Twitter when this episode gets released about like basically the history of TV abortions. And before 2003, the main like TV abortion that we ever saw, which we didn't actually see, it was off screen, was in Maude in 1980.
Oh, yes. I have not seen it, but I know about that. That was the like, I feel like that clip of her talking about it is like, I've seen it in compilations and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So between 1980 and 2003, anytime there was like discussion of maybe an abortion, it was always subverted, or they decided to have the baby, or they put it up for adoption, or it was a scare or whatever. And then in 2003, this and another show, a show called Soul Food on Showtime, which I've never seen, both had episodes where one of the central characters got an abortion, and it was just portrayed in this very straightforward way. So this is, another moment of 6 Feet Under really being just this barrier-breaking show that I don't think it gets enough credit for, and somebody should really do a podcast about it.
Not only do we get this like clinical, but also generous portrayal of what is a medical procedure, but, not the worst thing somebody can have done to their body. It's portrayed both as not as mundane, because it's obviously a big deal, but that I love when, you hear those girls' names. Yeah. Those women's names, just, that Claire is one of 5 of people that go in, and when she's later when she's leaving, five more people are coming through, and the people they're calling are not just coming in for abortions; they're going in to get a pap smear or get birth control. That it just is like another, it's just another day, and I thought it was really just wonderful.
Yeah, it was beautiful, and we'd get like there's an episode of Glow that reminds me very much of this.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And, it was also handled very well in Crazy Ex-Girlfriend and some other shows, but, this really laid the ground for it. And something I'm realizing as I'm thinking about it, wasn't Ruth 19 when she had Nate?
Yeah.
So this is like a real, like, straight up, this is Claire seeing a path to her mother's fate and completely not doing it. Lots
of wonderful parallels. And, we see Claire getting dressed in this locker room and, in a gown and a cap for her head. And they talk about how she chose Twilight Sedation.
Which is the title of the episode.
You're not really gone, but you're not really here.
Yeah.
Ugh, just the writing.
Yeah, well, and it's also like what a callback to what's happening with Lisa, like this real like Schrodinger's cat situation of like we don't know if she's alive or dead. It's a closed box.
Yeah, and just before Claire goes under, she sees Ruth, and she sees Russell.
Mm-hmm. And Ruth says they're going to take care of you, and Russell just stands over the bed looking down at her.
And then in the recovery room after, her procedure is over, Claire seems, Claire's sitting there and she seems, fine.
Yeah. And, throughout this, we've cut back to Brenda in the waiting room, just reading magazines and waiting and being just really there and concerned for Claire. I mean, I think Brenda definitely is like, I need someone to take care of right now. Like, there is a hole in my life where Billy was.
Oh, you're so right about that. That's true.
Yeah. And I mean, that's obviously something she has in common with Claire and with Ruth is like, she wants to take care of somebody. I do get the sense that Brenda has had an abortion.
Yeah, I thought so as well. And, when Claire is done, she comes out to see Brenda and Brenda takes the aftercare information for her. And Brenda is used to getting medical instructions, of course.
Yeah.
And as they leave, we hear more women being called in.
Yeah.
The day goes on.
This is what life is. I think mundane weirdly is the right word here.
Yeah, I guess that's right. So next, Ruth is at the pool with George. I guess his apartment complex has a pool, which many Los Angeles apartment complexes do. And I love that for George. We hear various places that George has lived. Mm-hmm. Like he taught at the University of Maryland, I believe. He says he taught at Amherst, like
Rutgers.
Papa was a Rolling Stone. And Ruth is reading a textbook that George has written on plate tectonics.
And then, Ruth says this thing that also speaks to this kind of idea of like liminal spaces and like impermanence. She's like, this has made me see the state of California in a different way. Like I've always thought of it as always just being here, but you think of it as just stopping by. And I mean, I think this gets echoed later when George is talking about the creek under his house in Massachusetts.
Yeah. Oh, I love that part.
Craig Wright. Oh.
So Ruth says that she thinks maybe, she and George should slow down, keep their relationship the way it's been going, but not make any marriage plans. And, George seems fine with that.
It's hard to separate how I feel about George from having seen the entire show, to be vague as possible about it.
Yes, but yes.
Watching this episode, aside from the 6 wives thing, which again, a huge red flag.
Talk about it. Yeah.
He seems great. He seems like far and away the best boyfriend that Ruth has ever had, aside from Bettina.
Yeah. Oh, God.
I mean, Bettina is in this episode because she's directing the episode.
Yeah, that's true. I do like to think that Bettina is, that she's just like, Ruth, I'm here. Blink twice.
I think she's just like Mufasa in the clouds.
Imagining that with Bettina and her fabulous bowl haircut is really amazing.
Oh, so good.
So I don't know if I'm projecting, but Ruth notes that there is no picture of George on the back of this textbook. And I think he says it's because it's about the rocks, not me.
Yeah.
Which I think is very funny. But I was like, you hiding from something, George? I don't know if this ever comes back. Like, I truly don't remember, but I was like, that's weird.
It seems like he's hiding something.
Seems suspicious. Also, I really just hope Ruth is wearing SPF 75. I was very, very worried. She's directly in the sun, no hat. It made me nervous. I didn't like it.
In the next scene, David and Patrick are on Patrick's couch with wine, just having friend talks. And David is being like, I think I have to end things with Keith. And he says, I'm so bored with this kind of unhappiness. I think I'm ready for some new unhappiness.
He says that at Patrick. Like, at Patrick.
Yes. The minute he agreed to that drink, he knew what he was doing.
Yeah, he knows what he's doing.
As we've seen, like, throughout this season, like, Patrick has always been this kind of other option for him. Like, the sort of more David-y kind of person. And they're listening to this, like, really, like, early 2000s kind of easy listening lounge music. And then they have this direct yet indirect talk where, you know, David's like, what do you think? Should I break up with him? And Patrick's like, Patrick's a good boy.
Yeah, Patrick's like nothing but respect for your relationship.
Yeah. He's like, I take your situation with Keith really seriously and I want you to be happy. But the whole time he's saying this, he's of course making sex eyes at him.
Yeah.
And then David leans in and kisses him.
I think that David is like a little into Patrick, but it just seems so much more. I don't think that he's using Patrick necessarily, maybe a little bit, but it's just the opposite of Keith.
Yeah.
And it's like he just needs to get some of that new unhappiness.
Exactly. I think he is into Patrick in a way where I don't think it would last between them. I don't think there's enough spark, but I think he's always been curious about Patrick.
So Brenda has brought Claire to her depressing little cottage. And to Brenda's credit, she's like, this house sucks, right?
Caroline, I was curious how you felt about Claire waking up on the used bedbug couch.
Well, don't worry. I have in my notes, Claire, that couch has bed bugs, is what I have written in my notes. I was very upset about it. I did so relate to Brenda being like, yeah, my house is gross. I used to always think to myself, when am I going to get to that grown-up place?
Yeah, man. I think about that every time I look at the mold I can't get out of my shower. And now, listeners, you know the dark truth.
It's not all glamour here. We're not over 6 feet under.
Brenda says, I almost got there with Nate. And Claire is just like, you're still in love with him, aren't you?
Yeah. You know, Brenda talks about it as she says, like, you know, I will always love him, but I don't, you know, I'm not thinking about him all the time, kind of wondering what he's doing.
But it could be the I will always love you of Dolly Parton to Porter Wagoner. Like,
that's true. You
know, being like, I gotta go, but I'll always love you.
I gotta go back to this deeply infested apartment. I love the way that Claire talks about Lisa.
Me too.
Claire says she feels like Lisa always liked her. And I love when Brenda said, I'm sure she did. It was very maternal. It was very sweet.
Well, and the way that Claire says that she always liked her is that way of like, she's always shocked when someone likes her, right?
Yeah, you're right about that. And Lisa was, from the first moment, Lisa really did seem to connect to Claire. And it, you know, there was, of course, an aspect of it that seemed like, I got to get to Nate. Like, how do I get to Nate?
Well, yeah, because Claire met her before anybody in Seattle when they took that trip.
But there did actually seem to be a connection, and, you know, she wanted to be at her art show, and she did seem to have some kind of connection to her. And, you know, it's sweet the way Claire is sort of like, sorry to talk about this, and the comparison of Brenda as sister-in-law versus Lisa as sister-in-law is really sharp.
Yeah, and I mean, she also has this classic Claire line where she's like, Lisa was definitely fucked up, but she was, like, different from our fucked up. She was a more friendly kind of fucked up.
Yeah. So Brenda is going to make some pasta with olive oil because it's not too heavy.
I just, like, in this moment, I'm like, can they just be roommates?
I know.
It wouldn't be good in the long term. Like, I'm sure it would curdle, but, like, just, like, Claire being out of that house for a minute, like, Brenda not being alone.
Yeah, you're right. So Nate is watching Sesame Street in the dark with Maya. We learn from this Sesame Street that blue can be the color of the ocean.
The ocean, throughout 6 Feet Under, but particularly in this episode, is death.
Yeah. Well, and Nate just imagines Lisa just, like, swimming in the ocean and being taken out to sea.
Like, very, very purposely, like, taking off her clothes and wading into the ocean to die.
Do you think it was to die?
I got that sense. I got the sense that it was like she was committing suicide, and that's what he was thinking.
Huh. Maybe you're right. I just thought that it was maybe she was, like, impulsively taking a dip and that it was an accident. But no, you might be right.
I'm inclined to go with the darker reading here.
I guess that's probably the way. And then I just wrote, oh no, Nate is calling someone. Don't do it, buddy.
No, Nate, no. It's Chekhov's hookup.
Yeah, oh God. Well, and then we briefly make a stop with David and Patrick hooking up. Seems fine.
Yeah.
The next scene does not seem fine, and it's so unpleasant.
No, it is like, I think, maybe not the most graphic sex scene we've gotten in this show, but the most graphic heterosexual sex scene we've gotten in this show.
Yeah, I don't really want to talk about it, but we have to. Season 4 is going to be tough for me.
So Nate and Allison are, I'm going to say they're fucking. They are not having sex. They are fucking.
Yeah.
And this is where I wrote my first all caps, heaven can't. Because we find out that they're fucking in the room with Maya.
Yeah, I don't like it. And then she's real chatty. And Nate's like, oh, don't be chatty. But like, dude, you brought her, like, you don't get to choose at this point.
He wanted a woman to yell at.
Yeah, that's true.
He wanted to have sex and get in his body and get out of his head, but he also wanted a woman to yell at.
There's just this like very terrible dance of like her being loud, him wanting her to be quiet, the baby is there. It just was bad. I don't know. I'm not very good at talking about this. The scene made, like, again, what I said at the beginning, so much of this episode, maybe just these parts, are just like very, very unpleasant to watch.
Yes, when I say that I really liked watching this episode, I don't mean I want to watch this really unpleasant hookup all day. No.
I know you weren't like, love this. This is more of this, please.
Yes, and then David and Patrick are at the end of their own infidelity, and Patrick's asleep, and David is looking off into space and thinking his thoughts. Like it's not a moment where you're like, oh, David's gonna jump into this relationship, because no, that's not what this is.
No, it's an exit strategy for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Next, we're in the funeral home, and Father Jack is in our eyes and ears here.
Mm-hmm. And he's doing the sermon at Carl's service, which has a surprising amount of people in attendance.
You know, I noted that too. I was like, who's this guy's friends? What's going on here? I was just curious, not that he doesn't deserve to have people at his service. I just was very curious.
Like, why does he have more people than the lady who died doing the crossword?
That is a fantastic question.
So Father Jack is reading, I looked this up, Romans 8:35, that starts, who will separate us from the love of Christ. And basically the point of this sermon is like, even though Carl was this monstrous person, he is still part of God's creation. And then he said, may his soul and the soul of the lives he took find peace. And that's it's a lot of Christian forgiveness.
I really did appreciate that Father Jack really did acknowledge what Carl did while still, honoring his humanity.
Yeah.
And, David and Nate are watching. Then, again, Nate really looks like he's just been in a thresher. And David is talking about Allison, and he says, I knew her at St. Bart's. She was pretty fucked up. And Nate was like, would have loved that information yesterday.
He wanted to fuck somebody who was fucked up.
Yeah, he had it.
Exactly what he wanted.
Don't make me talk about that tattoo again. Like, he had it. In the next scene, David is like Aaron Sorkin walk and talk style confessing to Father Jack as Father Jack is like trying to get to his car after the service.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, so I came out and I was in a relationship. Why isn't my life good?
Yeah, Father Jack says that relationships don't make life better, they make life possible. Which is, that sounds like it's like a procreation thing, which is like not valid here.
No, I didn't think that was what he was talking about at all.
Okay.
I thought he meant like it's just what makes it possible to be a human being.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
David's basically like, should I end this relationship with Keith? And Father Jack isn't like, based on what I saw at the porn store, everything seems fine. He's just like, I think you should do whatever brings you deeper into the reality of your life, the life you've got. Like, not some imaginary life that, that you're not in. And
yeah, I
mean, I think Father Jack is always like really spitting truth. Like, I really think That's how the show uses him.
Yes, and I think it really echoes what that rabbi that Nate was into said, where she said that, like, maybe your soulmate is the person who forces your soul to grow.
Yeah.
That it's like relationships aren't supposed to make you happy necessarily. Relationships are supposed to make you change and grow and live your life.
I just really wish that I knew what happened when we saw Father Jack and he said just Jack now. It's just such a mystery. And I can't tell. The show hasn't forgotten. It was like earlier in the season. So I just want to know what he was doing. If it just meant he was like, call me Jack because we're in a Blockbuster. Like, I don't.
Maybe it was that. So then Allison comes to Nate in his office after the service, and I bet he's going to be real cool to her. She's basically like, that was fun, we should do it again. And then Nate yells at her and says some incredibly cruel shit to her.
She really is so great in the scene, and there's a shot of her when she's crying where she's just like curled over. She's so upset.
Yeah, and he's like, you don't get to cry. Like, literally, this woman just buried her father. Like, I get that her father was a horrible man, but she buried her father. Like, and, you know, obviously she doesn't know the context about his wife being missing. And I think this is like, in the same way that he needed sex, he needed this. He needed somebody to scream at.
No, it's true. And someone who he doesn't think of as a person.
Yes, exactly. This is maybe one of the biggest Heaven Can't Nates of the whole series so far.
It's true.
I think. Then Nate is on the couch in like the dark and Claire comes in.